house. Like he just goes down this list of, you should be able to do all these things as a man. And then at the very end, he says specialization is for insects. And I did not always think that. All right. I mean, there was times in my life where I didn't care about learning how to weld or be mechanically inclined or any of these other things. I was like, oh, I just want to be a commando. You know, I just want to go and shoot and like do hard stuff. And that was a mistake. I mean, I think I've said this before on, you know, I did 2 ship deployments, 2 ARG deployments as a young frogman. And honestly, I was arrogant at the time. And man, here you're on a ship, which was kind of miserable. And I had a bad attitude about it, instead of, you know, because I'm like, I should be on land training more. And instead of going, okay, this is where I'm at. Yeah, I don't have to like it, but there's all these master machinists and welders and guys that are, you know, in charge of charts and navigation, like to navigate across the globe. And here I could have, if I would have showed just a little bit of interest, those guys would have been happy to be like, oh yeah, I'll teach you how to weld. I'll teach you how to run a lathe, like all these things that now I'm like, man, I want to learn all that stuff. I want to be able to do everything. And some of that's reinforced now. Kind of, we live out on a little bit of a farm. So you do need to be able to, when stuff breaks, you need to be able to fix it yourself. And so there's a lot of value in that. So I want, you know, number one, I want my boys to know and love Jesus. And then number 2, to be capable. It's actually, so we do a program called Father-Son Ministry, where it's gone through different iterations. Currently, the way we run it is you show up, we pray, we say the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we start training. You know, and that was very deliberate right there, that, hey, we honor God first, then we honor our nation, and then we start to train. Most of the time we do jiu-jitsu. So that's been just super cool, having the boys go from it just looking clownish, you know, them rolling around, to, man, they're, you know, some of those boys, I will actually, you know, break a sweat rolling with them now, and they will absolutely catch some guys with triangles and arm bar. Like, they're actually learning jiu-jitsu.
OutKick 360 rolls on. Coming up in 10 minutes, Dr. Jay Montgomery will join us, cardiologist. To be specific, Chad, cardiac electrophysiologist. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I was pre-med for one semester at Tennessee Hutton, and then went away from it for titles like that. Yeah. That scared me away.
We'll discuss Damar Hamlin, the recovery, and the cause of this, or potential causes, plural. Again, that's coming up in 10 minutes. Right now, though, it is time for Primary Complaint.
It's time to air our top grievance of the week.
You can complain all you want.
My job is so unfulfilling.
Don't run away from your feelings.
It's time for Primary Complaint on OutKick 360.
My primary complaint this week, not just in the Georgia-Ohio State game with that targeting call or call back, but also in the Michigan-TCU game and the officiating at the highest level of college football. Embarrassing, quite frankly. I know some of these calls are subjective. Others are very objective. But I could say there was very lopsided in one side over the other in regards to holding or no holding calls called in the Ohio State-Georgia game. And how that is not a touchdown for Michigan in that game is beyond me. When you have rules analysts for the network in the biggest game of college football to that point saying, yeah, there's no indisputable evidence that it's not a touchdown to this point. This is going to be 6, and instead it's not. I hate whenever in college you have awful officiating in the games that truly matter. That's my primary complaint.
Look, I hate half measures. You're either in or you're out. It's full go or no go. And we're running into this now in a post-COVID world at almost every business establishment. I'm staying in a hotel in Columbia, Missouri on my drive back, and I'm paying full price for this hotel room. But because of short staff, the rooftop bar isn't open. There's an area downstairs that's not open. You can't sit at the bar to watch the game. You got to go sit in a booth because we're short staffed. We got to get over this. Close down the damn hotel. It's not open. Or give away a room for $25. One or the other. Severe discounts or you're closed. I'm going to do hand signals right now for those watching. Open, closed. Open, closed. You can't show me a menu behind you and say, see the right side of the menu? We don't have it because we're short-staffed right now. No, you're closed. Shut the door, lock it up, and tell me you're closed. I am tired of short-staffed as an excuse. You're open or you're closed. When I left for this show for a week, Hutton didn't come in and say, we're doing half a show today because Chad Withrow's out. No, he got great co-host, and he delivered on a full show. Why? Because we're open at OutKick 360. And that is my primary complaint.
Open for business.
Well, gentlemen, my primary complaint is something I think many of us can relate to, but it's the idea of having to drive a friend or a loved one to the airport. Guys, there's this thing called Uber or Lyft. Use a ride share service. I get it if it's at a convenient time, but if you come to me the night before and like my roommate said, hey man, can you drive me to the airport tomorrow? I'm thinking, yeah, okay, it's not too far. What time do you need to go? When I heard 5:30, that's a.m., that's another problem. We have these things called phones that have apps to where you can get a ride for a very cheap rate from where you are currently stationed at. So for that is my primary complaint. And on top of that, just real quickly, whenever you ask for me to go pick somebody else up at the airport when there's bad weather conditions, I'm driving a Camry. I'm not going to be able to battle against the snow or the ice or whatever. Why do you think I'm a solid option to go and pick up somebody else there?
They're expecting you to drive
a Camry.
What's
the SNL skit with Will Ferrell? I drive a Dodge Stratus.
Yes.
At the dinner table.
Yeah, that's where they're always yelling at each other.
Yeah. And that ends the argument.
The one thing I will say about asking for rides, the one possible exception is when you have kids. Yeah. You need someone to like drive your car with the kid seats. Yeah. Because you can't just get an Uber and then have child seats in there to take your kids to the airport. But I doubt Davey's running into that problem. Davey strikes me as a guy that doesn't have friends with kids right now at this stage in his life. A lot of bachelors.
It's very assuming of you.
Bachelors or
with
married young couples without kids is what I'm saying.
You're saying Maddie didn't have kids?
It's no knock. I'm just saying, I mean, Maddie may have kids, but He's not raising them.
And what airport are you going to? He certainly was dropping off at Southwest, that's for sure.
Matty strikes me more as a deadbeat dad.
Dr. Jay Montgomery is next on OutKick 360.
College football's in trouble. There's a lot of people trying to keep it from happening.
I think it's a general consensus across the college football landscape. We want to play football.
College football is a huge part of the fall. It's a huge part of Americana itself.
It just really felt like people in the country needed college football to just feel a little sense of normal.
Big news from the Big Ten as the conference releasing its 10-game football schedule.
We go home thinking there's going to be practice the next day. Everybody gets a text, stay home, everything's canceled.
Big Ten fall football season has been canceled.
We just believe collectively there's too much uncertainty.
I guess what I'm trying to understand, though, Kevin, is that was the same position you had 6 days ago.
The Big Ten is an unmitigated disaster.
There was a ton of confusion. There was presidents saying one thing, there was coaches saying another.
Players had to be silent, coaches had to be silent, ADs had to be silent.
People said, how does what you just did make any sense?
And nobody really knew what the heck happened when they voted to cancel the season.
You make this huge historical announcement, and then Kevin Warren never does a press conference to explain it. It was like a masterclass in how not to handle a crisis.
The word really that was lacking in all of this is transparency.
It felt like a lot of stuff was happening behind closed doors.
Even today, we still don't know what occurred.
So you don't tell us parents, that's fine, but you're not telling the young men that it affects.
We have to make a decision to save the season. What about the history books? What about the rivalry games? What about Paul Bunyan's axe? How is that not going to go to a team this year?
This is a failure of epic magnitude. The Big Ten presidents and leaders should be held accountable for the disastrous decisions that they're making.
Then the commissioner doubles down, saying his decision will not be revisited.
And that's the point. It felt like a war was declared on the Big Ten and Kevin Warren.
Everything turned political.
Because if this is medical, then you would have stopped the game of football a long time ago.
I think the Big Ten leaders will tell you that they probably made a mistake in hindsight.
If I had the chance to do it all over last year, I would make the same decisions that we made.
Just like that, the second hour is here. OutKick 360 rolls on from Music City and across the vast OutKick network. We say hello to you. Glad you're with us. And we will have Clay Travis a bit later in today's show. We will hit the NFL headlines with the playoff scenarios and take a look at the playoff picture as it sits currently. But the headline across the NFL remains with Damar Hamlin, the Bills safety who suffered cardiac arrest on the field in Monday night's football game in Cincinnati. And with more perspective on that, we're going to the expert. Dr. Jay Montgomery joins us. He's a cardiac electrophysiologist, also professor of medicine at Vanderbilt University, and he joins us now on OutKick 360. Doctor, thank you for the time.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with this. You've seen video of what happened, and we're telling any medical expert we talk to, obviously, you're not there to treat the patient, but just watching from the outside, an insider watching from the outside, you've seen things like this before, and I'm sure that you have an opinion on some possibilities of what could have happened in this incident with Damar Hamlin. What are some of those possibilities, Doctor?
Sure. So anytime an athlete has an arrest during practice, during a game, and when I say an arrest, what I mean is suddenly the heart rhythm becomes abnormal. The heart is quivering instead of beating in a organized fashion. The result of that is that you really don't have blood pressure to your head. You pass out, and it can be fatal, obviously. So anytime there's an arrest during activity, like sports, there's a few different possibilities. One is that it could be the result of what we would commonly call a heart attack or a myocardial infarction. So that really means that there's a blocked artery to the heart. One of the arteries that supplies blood to the heart muscle, it gets blocked. That part of the muscle isn't getting that blood flow. It starts to undergo injury. In that setting, you can then have a cardiac arrest. The two things are not the same thing, but that can lead to an arrest. That's relatively uncommon in young athletes, though it is possible, especially if the arteries take an abnormal course, abnormal path through the heart, and that would be something that you'd be born with. It's a much more common cause of an arrest in an older person. In an athlete, the most common thing would be hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which is a genetic problem. It's what Reggie Lewis died of, among many other athletes that have more recently often been resuscitated from an arrest. And so that is certainly possible here. And there's other genetic rhythm problems as well that can cause arrests. What makes Damar's episode a little bit different was that he wasn't sort of just running down the field, as we all seen. There was an impact, I think, with T. Higgins' shoulder hit him generally in the center of the chest, maybe left side of the chest, which brings up actually a less common cause of cardiac arrest, something called commotio cordis. There's definitely no guarantee that that's what caused this, but this is consistent with that, just in the way he got hit. In this, when someone has commotio cordis, two things have to happen. You have to have an impact right over the heart, and it has to happen at just the wrong time during the heartbeat. It's a very narrow little window during each heartbeat when the heart can be hit in order to cause this. And that research was done in Boston about 15 or 20 years ago, kind of showing how that happens when that window is. And then that, if you get hit just wrong, you go from normal rhythm to cardiac arrest. The heart's just doing this, no blood pressure, you pass out. And, if somebody doesn't do something, that's a fatal problem.
And Damar Hamlin, 24 years old, when you talk about commotio cordis, is this something that happens typically younger people, older people? Where do you see this? And just how uncommon is this? Obviously, we've never really seen anything like this watching a football game live happen. So it has to be pretty rare.
It's very rare. It is even more rare in adults than in children. Presumably, if Damar was 48, it would actually be even less likely, assuming that's what this is, than if he were 24. The thought is that the chest wall has to be soft and compliant. And by that, I mean the ribs have to sort of be able to be compressed. And the older we get, sort of the more bony our ribs get, the less they sort of get squished easily by impact. Commotio cordis is very uncommon in general. It is definitely more common in 10-year-olds than it is in 24-year-olds, but still, these are rare events that many people, go their whole careers and never see at all. I've taken care of one patient who had commotio cordis. It was actually a 22-year-old. I'm an adult cardiologist, so of course I wouldn't have seen the children, but and that was actually an impact from a lacrosse ball that got run over by a huge lawnmower and happened to hit him in the chest just wrong. Similar thing. Thankfully, that had a good outcome.
So can you walk us through the research for this? You mentioned it took place in Boston. I hear a story like this, and I'm thinking, the medical community just amazes me that you can come up with explanations for things like this that I would never even think as a possibility for an incident like this. What went into the research to discover causes of this condition?
Well, I'm somewhat sorry to say the research for this is basically there were anesthetized, swine, pigs that were sort of held in place, and they were hit with baseballs at various timing and various velocity. And so that is how we know what we know about commotio cordis.
And the research showed that you could stop the heart if hit at the exact
Absolutely.
right time. Yeah.
Yes. And if it was at the right velocity and timed just right with the heartbeat, and of course with, an EKG, like an electrocardiogram, they can set it up to time it a little earlier, a little later, and they, kept doing different versions to figure out at this velocity, with this timing, what happens. And they figured out that with the right timing and with the right velocity, which I think the velocity was in the 40-mile-per-hour range for a baseball, but I mean, these were like 45-pound pigs, that was sort of the sweet spot.
Dr. Jay Montgomery, our guest, cardiac electrophysiologist and a professor of medicine at Vanderbilt University. Doctor, there's a lot of discussion about the safety of football, the safety of the sport now, and there has been. There are plenty of other things to point to as far as safety is concerned and the focus. But in terms of this, listening to you, like a guy mowing his lawn and it hits, a lacrosse hits someone in the chest, or your baseball, I'm assuming, can cause this as well, or a car accident. In terms of the sport itself, this was, we've never seen anything like this, but this can happen in everyday walk of life, not just a contact sport.
Yeah, it actually is much more likely in sports, though. The most likely scenarios would be lacrosse, I think, is number one. Baseball, less likely with sports with bigger, larger things impacting you. The smaller sort of heavy projectiles seem to be what cause it. However, it's rare in any sport. In lacrosse, I think, I'm not a lacrosse expert, but I think it's fairly common for lacrosse players to actually have a chest shield. Mm-hmm. And I think some people do that for baseball, not anybody that I know personally, but for this reason. But it's a very rare thing. If we wanted to talk about safety of football, this is not on the top 10 concerns. If you were trying to say, what are the things we can do to keep people safe who are playing football? This is not something that across large populations is going to be the biggest risk to somebody playing football.
I get, and hearing the description of it, yes, and hearing the description of it, are you surprised that it doesn't happen in football the most? Given this was a very routine play. And for us to see this, we're like, what is going on here? We didn't know this could occur in this way in the middle of a game.
Yeah, I think part of it is maybe just that there might be a lot of reasons for it. Part of it, I think, is that at least with the pig research, the velocity of 45 miles per hour, and that's for small pigs. Mm-hmm. Nothing is traveling that fast in football, actually. One person hitting another at full speed is only going to be 40 miles an hour. But that's going to be very uncommon to get hit right in the chest. And for adults, I suspect that the optimal velocity would be higher, though that research has not been done. That was part of what we were seeing with I wrote up a report about the 22-year-old that we saw, that this lacrosse ball was probably going, for a variety of reasons, we think about 200 miles an hour. And that doesn't happen in football. even if the football is thrown, of course it could be going 50, 60 miles an hour, but I mean, it's soft, right? So the football itself isn't going to cause that type of impact. Also, if you get hit by somebody's shoulder, it's bigger. It just impacts a much larger area, and maybe that's protective compared to a lacrosse ball or baseball, where the ball may be this big, but the area of impact is probably quite a bit smaller than that. So I think that's probably a lot of the reason we don't see it. The velocity and then the size of the actual footprint of the impact itself.
And you've got obviously some experience with this with the 22-year-old that you've referenced with the lacrosse ball. What is protocol when treating a patient like this? I think a lot of people just saw, not knowing, oh, he's intubated, that must be a bad sign. But that's not necessarily the case. There's some reports coming out from the family that while they can't get into details, there's been some encouraging signs. We're now 36 hours, getting close to 48 hours away from the injury. Walk us through what the process would be like after an injury like this and where we could be in the process right now, if you could.
Sure. So if somebody has a primary arrhythmia, which I'm assuming that this is, but I do not know that, then that means that the first problem that he had was that he had a cardiac arrest, not that he had a heart attack, didn't have a blocked artery. It didn't start out with, poor blood flow to a part of his heart. The first thing that happened was his heart started quivering, a cardiac arrest. The number one thing that we want to happen is chest compressions, hands-only CPR, followed by a shock, a defibrillation by an AED at a professional sports event. At a high school sports event, there should be an AED. That is number one. That's what we want to happen first, as soon as possible. And I don't know the exact details of what they did for Damar, because there was, the team surrounded him and stuff. So they did all of those things, exactly what order and all that stuff, I can't tell. Once a patient is resuscitated with an AED, some of the time, if it happens very quickly, they may wake up, literally on the field, wake up. In that case, you wouldn't end up with a breathing tube. Most of the time, the person at that point has been down long enough that they're not going to immediately wake up. And they would put a breathing tube in probably before they put him in the ambulance, most likely.
How many?
If they think, yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Please finish. This is fascinating based on the details of the process.
Yeah. So if they think that he was down for several minutes, meaning without a pulse for several minutes, which is my understanding in this scenario, then they might elect to sort of do what we call targeted temperature management, where they sort of try to prevent his body temperature from going up with special things, because there's some evidence, there's conflicting evidence, that protects the brain after an arrest like this. And so there's some chance that in a scenario like this, maybe not this scenario, I don't know, they may elect to keep him sedated so that they can control the body temperature and have everything sort of controlled. In that scenario, leaving the breathing tube in is something that's done as a choice. You leave it in because you're sedating him, because you're trying to control these other things. And so, it may be that the reason that he's still unconscious and with a breathing tube is because the treatment team thinks that's the best way to give him the best chance for a full recovery. In the process of all this, sometimes people can have other things that happen. So that might be, liquids from the stomach can sort of regurgitate and end up in the lungs, unfortunately. That can cause lung problems. Sometimes in all of the different things that happen, people can end up with infections and stuff like that. These are the types of speed bumps that people sometimes encounter when they have something like this happen, something that is not the original problem, but something that follows from it.
And certainly not just with Damar, but with anyone that's gone through this process. What are things, doctor, that you would be looking for as the next step of recovery, the next solid and encouraging sign that things are going well?
Yeah, I mean, there's basically two things here. One is that the organs from the neck down tolerated all this okay. And so that includes the lungs, which I know he's had, I heard at least that he was on an elevated level of oxygen, then they brought it down. That's good. Ideally he wouldn't have required a high level of oxygen at all, but it sounds like he did, at least briefly. But hopefully all of those organs are working okay, kidneys, et cetera. Sometimes they can sort of take some hits from this, but in a young, healthy person, usually that stuff bounces back okay. And then the second thing is, the neurologic recovery after an arrest like this. So when someone is down for a period of minutes, if they've got chest compressions, if they get shocked by a defibrillator, what we're hoping then is that the brain was getting enough oxygen through that process that there's not any sort of long-term damage to the brain. Often in these scenarios, if somebody has an arrest that's witnessed, which this one was witnessed by as many people as maybe ever in history, and someone gets there with a defibrillator, with the AED, they often make a full recovery. But there's all these different types of speed bumps that can happen that can make that, more or less likely.
With your 22-year-old patient that got hit by the lacrosse ball at 200 miles per hour from the lawnmower, was there someone there to witness the incident? Do you know how many minutes the patient was without oxygen, and what level of recovery did that patient make?
Yeah, so it was witnessed. I believe a kind of a distant family member witnessed it, called 911, and they did, he did chest compressions till the ambulance got there. The ambulance got there, shocked him. I think that was probably 15 minutes. That's sort of a pretty standard amount of time. I mean, an ambulance is not going to show up in 30 seconds for sure. As far as I know, he made a completely full recovery. But
Dr. Jay Montgomery has been our guest with great perspective here. Doctor, thank you so much for the time and the great insight with this and what is a headline that many of us are talking about but have no clue what goes on behind the scenes with a situation like this. So we appreciate you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You can follow him at jmontgomery44 for more info on anything you may need.
Assistant professor of medicine specializing in arrhythmia and electrophysiology at Vanderbilt University.
Coming up, we'll take a look at the NFL playoff picture. We will also discuss Gio Reyna from the U.S. men's national team, whose father, Claudio, reportedly was attempting to blackmail the coach for the U.S. men's national team, Greg Berhalter. And the details behind that tie in with Gio's mother. Crazy story we'll dive into next on OutKick 360.
Man, just getting into the craziness. We've got the college football playoff championship game coming up on Monday. But looking back, your opinion, semifinal Saturday was just so wild, and getting to watch these games and coming down to the wire and the back and forth. Let's start off with Michigan TCU. You got Max Duggan and the way that he played, Jim Harbaugh and his squad. It just seemed like they kind of laxed out there in the middle, and TCU took advantage. And what were your takeaways of how TCU is now playing for a national championship?
I was pretty stunned that it happened and pretty stunned by the way it happened. So I guess going in, if you were to tell me an upset's going to happen, not the craziest thing in the world. I didn't expect it, but it's not a wild concept that a 9-point favorite or underdog can win a game. When you start to see it play out and you realize Michigan has these weapons that have gotten them to where they are, and they are electing not to use those weapons. Inside zone was a figment of your imagination in that game. It just didn't happen. Therefore, using J.J. McCarthy's legs really didn't happen. The way that you had seen it happen earlier in the season, using Donovan Edwards down inside the 5, where they got inside twice and scored 0 points from those trips, didn't happen. So I was sort of incredulous watching how it was unfolding. So here's what's funny. We were at the Peach Bowl, and that game's getting ready to happen, and I was on the field watching warm-ups, and I was standing there talking. Let me whisper. I was standing there talking with Urban Meyer, and he is watching the video board, along with a lot of the other Ohio State staffers. And so it's kind of always a surreal environment. If you've ever been at that late playoff game, the early game's happening as your game's getting warmed up. And if you're in a stadium that has a big video board, like Mercedes-Benz has that ribbon board, it's on and the players can see it. And certainly the fans are reacting. So when TCU would score, Urban Meyer's just like going crazy, like a pure fanboy, just cheering like openly. And you're seeing some of the players on the field acknowledge it. And you're seeing some of the staffers on the sideline acknowledge it and like cheer. And all the while you're saying, hold on, we got a game that's going to kick off here in an hour. I'm not saying they weren't focused. I'm just saying it was a weird dynamic. But yeah, watching that unfold, and then just you knew what was immediately going to come after that. And that was Michigan lost. Okay, now we start up the Jim Harbaugh NFL rumor train, and that's going on even as we speak. So I was a little dumbfounded, to be honest with you. Not that they lost, but the manner in which they lost.
Is that going to transition? And I know we'll get into Georgia here in just a minute, but we've seen teams in the past where they get all up for one game and they put it all on the line. And then come that second game, and I'm not even just talking about playoffs. I could be talking about regular season as well. Can TCU do that again? Can they have that same type of energy? Can they play that same type of defense, and which was lacking in the third quarter? But I'm saying, can they get up for that type of game one more time?
I don't doubt they'll be up, but there are things that have to happen. You can call it disrespecting TCU if you want to. I fully respect the program, but we got to be real here. We're talking about a 12 or 13-point spread for a reason. There are things Georgia would have to do to assist them. Football happens that way sometimes. It just happened in the Michigan game. Michigan did some things to assist them. Credit TCU for grabbing the game and taking it. If Georgia doesn't do that, no, I don't think any amount of hype or being up will matter, because Georgia's a better team than you. They're that much better than you. If you can start to pull them out into the deeper end of making some mistakes, whether they be self-inflicted or whether you can steal a possession or two, onside kicks, fake punts, etc., all of which I think will have to be pulled out of the bag by TCU in this game.
OutKick 360 rolls on across the OutKick network. Clay Travis joins us in a little under an hour. Looking forward to that chat as we broadcast from 6th and Peabody with Yeehaw Beer and Old Smoky Moonshine. Gio Reyna, at the U.S. For the World Cup U.S. men's national team, after the tournament, Greg Berhalter essentially broke the news that the explanation for him not playing against Wales and barely against England was poor effort and attitude on Reyna's part. And that's where the story really starts with all of this. You can read this at OutKick.com.
Well, and essentially told, his role wasn't going to be what he thought. And then Reyna, the younger Reyna, started to dog it in training in Qatar and around it, and became a real distraction to the team, where he had to stand up and apologize to the team. So Danielle Reyna, who was his mom and has a long-time connection to Greg Berhalter, the coach, all from Jersey. Claudio Reyna, his father, played together on past U.S. men's national teams, basically says it's unfair that Greg Berhalter is continuing to drag my son through the mud because he spoke at a sports convention. By the way, a convention that was supposed to be off the record and not reported on, that there was a reporter there who reported on it. He never mentioned Gio Reyna by name, but told stories about what clearly everyone knew was Gio Reyna. When those reports came out, Mom was pissed. Mom decides, I know way more about what this guy did at Gio's age that's worse than what Gio did, and I'm going to expose that now. This is small-town politics at its worst. This is what happens on a high school football team in middle-of-nowhere Texas with parents who grew up together, and now the older person's the coach, and I'm going to expose the coach because they're not playing my son. This is supposed to be the U.S. men's national team, and this is small-town politics taking over. Here's what should happen. Gio Reyna should not be allowed to play for the U.S. because he quit on the United States of America and this team because he was pouting. I don't care how old he is. If he's old enough to kick a soccer ball hard enough to be elected a member of the U.S. freaking men's national team, he's old enough to know not to quit. He knows what he did was wrong. And now the fact that this is happening after the fact, ridiculous. Ban this guy and his family from the U.S. men's national team. I don't care how talented he is. I don't care how good he is. I don't care what the implications are internationally on some German club. I'm not German. I don't care. I'm American. He quit on America. He quit on the U.S. men's national team, and now his parents are blackmailing the coach because they didn't like that he wasn't playing as much as they thought he should be playing. It's absurd, this entire story.
And reportedly, I believe that the national team says that they first learned about this on December 11th, right?
Yes.
So, and that comes on the tail of everything that was going on.
They ratted on Greg Berhalter because they've known him most of his life. And the incident is that he talked about now was that he kicked his future wife in a domestic violence incident before they were married. They were 18 years old. They've now been married for 28 years, I think was the number. I need to look that up to make sure.
Right, yeah.
They've been married a long time since then. To our knowledge, nothing has happened since. I'm not apologizing for kicking a woman. I mean, clearly what he did was wrong, and it's shameful, and it's going to reflect on Berhalter now moving forward. I'm just outraged at the kid quit because he was pouting, and instead of just doing what you're supposed to do on a team and sucking it up and going to practice and trying to help your teammates get better to win on the world stage, he became a distraction to the team, and it's self-sabotage. He self-sabotaged himself, which sabotaged the team. I'm not saying that they're going to beat, Netherlands in advance if he's being a good little teammate the whole time, but it certainly didn't help. And then the parents got angry and decided, okay, I'm going to turn rat now on the head coach of the U.S. men's national team because I've got dirt on this guy. None of that is right.
No.
No one looks good in any of this.
She's admitted to doing it as well. Yeah, you're right. It's small-town politics at its worst.
It reads like a story that comes from a more passionate soccer nation with less resources than the United States. I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. This sounds like something that's going to come from some South American country that's soccer crazed, that you have some story there's a lot of glad handing and nepotism involved, and then someone's mad over something, so they tell a bad story about that person from 20 years ago to try to get them out of their job, and it's small time. It's small time for something that should be big time. That's what annoys me about this whole story.
Chad, we head into the NFL playoff picture right now, and what is the final week of the NFL season as we sit here today. There's plenty of questions in the AFC. And it's because of the path for the Chiefs to get the first round bye. So right now, the Bills, by losing one game, the Chiefs can take the top seed by beating out the Las Vegas Raiders on Saturday. Okay? That's the simple path for the Chiefs to get the number one.
So Chiefs beat Raiders.
Yep.
They're number one.
Yep.
Okay.
No, if the Bills lose.
If the Bills lose. Gotcha.
Now, if the Bengals, if they would have beat the Bills, they would need to beat the Ravens next week to have the Chiefs lose to Vegas to get the number one seed. Does that make sense? They need the Chiefs to lose. And they also need the Bills in the head-to-head matchup to lose.
To lose to the Patriots.
So to the Bengals. So we don't know that result, clearly.
Yeah, I don't think that result's going to happen, personally.
So the Bills and Chiefs, of course, they've won their respective divisions. We'll see the Bengals and Ravens play for it for the North this week. But there's a chance where this is still up for grabs with not knowing the head-to-head matchup between the Bills and Bengals. And the question would be, and I think they're trying to decide this, how do you determine the tiebreakers for a no contest versus a tie? The tie would benefit, I believe, Kansas City. And a no contest, based on what I've been trying to find, there's no technical tiebreaker for two teams that go into a no contest and how you determine it, other than I would just assume it's based on the normal tiebreaker scenario, conference record, then you go to common opponent, different things. But by not playing it, and the fact that the bylaws are the bylaws, and you have to get everyone to agree to it, it's not like you can just change it in the mid-season. We haven't seen the tiebreaker scenario changed in mid-season. I'm curious about how they handle this, because on one thought, you just come up with a new set of guidelines and everyone agrees to it and you don't play this game. There are many that are saying you play the Week 19 game, quote unquote, between the Bills and the Bengals. But by doing so, again, there would be no other games that weekend. By doing so, you're potentially having two teams, the number one seeds, off for 21 days. Could be Kansas City, and it's most likely Philadelphia, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It could be Dallas. Could be San Francisco. So I don't know how they'll handle the competitive aspect of this.
There's no way to pull this off without screwing over someone.
Right.
So as hard as it is to admit, I think the simplest conclusion is that game's just not going to be played. And then you let the dice fall. These are playoff teams regardless. You just say, yeah, you're losing a home game, or you're losing a seed line, or this is going to happen. But this is the easiest way to do it, to keep our schedule and keep things going right up until that 1 week off before the Super Bowl. And like you said, not have a team sit for 21 days, not have all these other issues, not have a weekend where it's one football game all weekend and then pushing everything right back up until the week of the Super Bowl. I just think that's there's no simple, easy solution that it's going to be fair for everyone involved and it's going to be fine. There's none of that in this situation. So to me, the most likely outcome, Hutton, is you do what affects the least amount of people involved, and that's just canceling this game altogether and then rolling with the playoffs.
I mean, and after battling for the number one seed, it just absolutely sucks for the Bills for that home field advantage, right? But I saw it somewhere. The compromise that was floated out was if the Chiefs end up with the number one seed and you don't play this game, the compromise would be if it's Chiefs Bills in the AFC Championship game, you would play that on a neutral site. Now you would need the Chiefs on board with that, which I don't know how that would go about. But Chad,
that would be a good compromise.
But you'd also have to be able to have tickets sold for the AFC Championship game.
50-50.
Well, no, I mean, like the other championship game, if the Bills lose, you're playing that game at Arrowhead. So you got to sell that out and then refund that. Like, how do you go about it? It is a headache, a total headache.
Well, but again, and I'll go back. You're right. There's no Tylenol for this headache, right? There's no just one simple solution. It's fair for everyone. We're going to have the same January, February schedule that we all love for the playoffs, and it's going to be simple. There's no easy out with this situation. So doesn't it feel like the most likely decision by the league is to make the decision that affects the least amount of people?
Yeah, yes.
Which that is, game is canceled. And you're going to have Week 18, and then you're going to have the wild card round the following week, and you roll right through the playoffs as normal, and you just let the record stand what it is with the canceled game, and you seed teams from that point on. I think that's where we're headed. I also wouldn't want to be the owner that gets stepped on in this, only because you're then put in a very uncomfortable spot to be the one to raise your hand and say,
Yeah.
hey, this isn't fair for me. And then the natural response is, well, it's not fair for Damar Hamlin or the league or the Buffalo Bills that they're dealing with this so tough. You have to deal with it. It's almost like you just have to eat your vegetables if you're the team that gets screwed over in this situation.
I'd love to have like you have the locker room cameras. I'd love the cameras inside the meeting room of how they're going to determine this.
Yeah, and I think if you're just the team that's, I'm the one now that it's not fair for. If you're the owner, you almost just have to suck it up and say, well, that's life.
And
we got to
I
deal
don't
with
know
this.
if they're
No one was
actually
expecting
discussing that
this
scenario.
No one was expecting this, and this is what we're going to have to deal with.
Here are
But it's fascinating to think about the inner workings of it with the league, with the teams that'll be in the playoffs, and what discussions may be being had right now, for all we know.
Yeah,
with all these sides.
Bengals and Ravens currently, that's the matchup in the postseason. That could also, they play this week. So you've got the 6 taking on the 3 right now, and 11-4, 10-6. But you could have a rematch a week from now, potentially, in the wild card playoffs. Meanwhile, the Jags and Titans play for the AFC South. As of today, they would host the Chargers. Patriots, they win and they get to the postseason at 9-8. But they've got to win.
Which we all but buried them after that decision-making at the end of the Raiders game.
Yeah. Solid job, both by Belichick and Tomlin with their rosters this year. There's a path for Pittsburgh to get in, believe it or not.
Never count out Mike Tomlin and that organization.
There's a path.
Ever.
There's a path for Jacksonville to get that 7 spot if they lose to the Titans.
There's a path where both the Titans and the Jags are in the playoffs.
Yes. If
I was reading a wild scenario where that could happen.
If they lose to the Titans can't get in if they lose.
Yeah. Titans win, though, and then 2 or 3 other things happen, and the Jags could get in also.
Yeah. And here's the look at the NFC postseason picture. Right now, the Eagles have the first-round bye, but Dallas could win it. Dallas could get the first-round bye this week. They can win the division, first and foremost, by winning and Philadelphia losing. Talk is Jalen Hurts is coming back. We'll continue to update the injury reports throughout the week. Seahawks right now are in, but there is plenty of scenarios for the 7 seed in the NFC, including Green Bay, which will be Sunday Night Football. Of course, we've got the Vikings and 49ers logos flip-flop there. We recognize that as we look at it. But San Francisco, to me, is one of the top 2 teams in the NFC, and I think it's Philly or San Fran that I would bank on out of this group. Oh, and
Philly with Jalen Hurts coming back.
Yeah.
Philly with Gardner Minshew isn't the same.
No,
regardless of speculation about
it.
Jalen Hurts obviously makes a big difference
0-2
with that offense.
Yeah. And meanwhile, Brock Purdy down double digits last week. Pulls them back, gets them to overtime, wins the game.
An incredible story. Also an incredible story, Jalen Hurts, which reminds me, there's a story up at OutKick.com I highly recommend you read. Chris Sims and Davey, if we can find this video, I'd love to play it at some point. The problem is there's so many curse words in it that have to be bleeped out.
Yeah.
But Chris Sims on his show, I guess on his Pro Football Talk show or one of his podcasts.
Yeah, he's got the podcast.
It was like a video show where it looks like they're in the lobby of a business office. I guess it's like the headquarters of, I don't know, of PFF maybe is where they are, where they do the show. But he goes off on SportsCenter and ESPN for continuing to play his quote that the Eagles wouldn't take a big step back without Jalen Hurts and Gardner Minshew coming in. I guess he said it on Football Night in America. And, I mean, he just says, you know, and also randomly in the middle of an answer to a question about it, you know, everyone at that network can bleep right off, all of you, and stop playing my quote and making money off of it and trying to make me look bad with my quote about it. And he said no one was talking about my quote when they almost beat the Cowboys with Gardner Minshew. And then, yeah, they had a bad game. They're clearly better with Jalen Hurts as quarterback, but now everyone's using that quote against me. It's prime audio, and you can read the story at OutKick.com.
Keep in mind, Packers win, they're in. They'll be the 7 seed, not Seattle. Seattle needs Green Bay to lose. Coming up, also quotes that, well, Chris Sims is saying he's not taking it back, but he also is saying you were ripping me for at the time.
We can play this audio that we're going to have when we come back.
Okay.
There's no curse words in it, thankfully.
When we come back, though, there's someone who's not taking back a quote, and his host, at least seemingly, is extremely upset about it. That's next on OutKick 360.
Back to the Christian thing in the broad picture. Your father, how many kids, if you don't mind saying, do you have several kids, one kid?
Seven children.
You have 7 children, so you're a big family, man. I did not know that.
Yes.
How many sons? Because this is what I kind of want to dig into.
I have 5 sons.
5 sons, perfect. As a Christian man, how do you feel, like, what is your job when it comes to raising young men in modern America?
Number one, to teach my boys to know and love Jesus. That would be their primary identity in life. To everything else being completely secondary to that. That is number one. Number 2 would be to make them capable men, right? To make them well-rounded, to make them, able to handle themselves, to make them strong physically, able to fight, able to shoot, able to protect their future, their own families. A great quote, Robert Heinlein, and I'm going to butcher it, but I will attempt it anyways. He basically says that, a man should be able to plan an invasion, change a diaper, cook a meal, build a house, he just goes down this list of, you should be able to do all these things as a man. And then at the very end, he says specialization is for insects. And I did not always think that. All right. I mean, there was times in my life where I didn't care about learning how to weld or be mechanically inclined or any of these other things. I was like, oh, I just want to be a commando. I just want to go and shoot and do hard stuff. And that was a mistake. I mean, I think I've said this before on, I did 2 ship deployments, 2 ARG deployments as a young frogman. And honestly, I was arrogant at the time. And man, here you're on a ship, which was kind of miserable. And I had a bad attitude about it instead of, because I'm like, I should be on land training more. And instead of going, okay, this is where I'm at. Yeah, I don't have to like it, but there's all these master machinists and welders and guys that are, in charge of charts and navigation, to navigate across the globe. And here I could have, if I would have showed just a little bit of interest, those guys would have been happy to be like, oh yeah, I'll teach you how to weld. I'll teach you how to run a lathe, all these things. That now I'm like, man, I want to learn all that stuff. I want to be able to do everything. And some of that's reinforced now. Kind of, we live out on a little bit of a farm, so you do need to be able to, when stuff breaks, you need to be able to fix it yourself, and so there's a lot of value in that. So I want, number one, I want my boys to know and love Jesus, and then number 2, to be capable. It's actually, so we do a program called Father-Son Ministry, where it's gone through different iterations. Currently, the way we run it is you show up, we pray, we say the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we start training. And that was very deliberate right there, that, hey, we honor God first, then we honor our nation, and then we start to train. Most of the time we do jiu-jitsu. So that's been just super cool, having the boys go from it just looking clownish, them rolling around, to, man, they're, some of those boys, I will actually, break a sweat rolling with them now, and they will absolutely catch some guys with triangles and armbar. They're actually learning jiu-jitsu.
OutKick 360 rolls on. We went through the tweet from Skip Bayless yesterday that he sent out Monday night during the medical attention given to Damar Hamlin, the Bills safety who suffered the cardiac arrest in the middle of the first quarter. And, well, Shannon Sharp from Undisputed, they've been doing the show, 2.5, 3 years now?
Longer than that. 2016. I was surprised.
What?
I've been doing this for 6 years, almost 7.
It's
Show
been
started
that long?
in 2016, yep.
Wow. It does not feel that long. They for the most part get along, right? Like this is a show that is set up to be confrontational and set up to, in many ways, it's scripted. You're going to take this side. You're going to take this side. Have at it. Well, you have at it here. We'll play and listen to it where you can make the determination for yourself whether or not you think this is real or fake based on Shannon Sharp returning to the set after missing yesterday's show. And this is how the show begins.
Good to see you, Shannon. I understand you have something you want to share this morning.
Good morning, yes.
Morning.
There's been a lot of speculation of why I wasn't on air yesterday, and I won't get into speculation or conjecture or innuendo, but I will say this. In watching that game on Monday night, what happened to Damar Hamlin struck me a little different. As a brotherhood in the NFL, when injuries happen, when we know injuries are a part of the game, I've seen guys suffer ACLs and Achilles tear, but I've never seen anybody have to be revived and fight for their life on the field. So it struck me a little differently because I remember seeing my brother paralyzed on the field temporarily, and he was able to regain focus. Skip tweeted something, and although I disagree with the tweet, and hopefully Skip would take it down, but I didn't want it.
Well, time out. I'm not going to take it down because I stand by what I tweeted.
Skip, let me finish.
All right. Okay.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
Go ahead. Let's go, Jen.
Okay.
I mean, I cannot even get through a monologue without you interrupting me.
Well,
you could have came back. Skip,
well, I thought,
Skip, just let.
I didn't know you were going to bring up
No,
this.
I was just going to say, Skip, I didn't want to yesterday to get into a situation where Damar Hamlin was the issue. We should have been talking about him and not get into your tweet. That's what I was going to do. But you can't even let me finish my opening monologue without you interrupting.
Okay. I was under the impression you weren't going to bring this up because nobody here had a problem with that tweet.
No. Clearly, the bosses wanted you to offer explanations. So clearly, somebody.
No, they did not have. Nobody.
Let's go, Jen.
Thoughts and prayers remain with Damar Hamlin.
That's where the focus should have been, and not on the football game. Yes, let's go, Jen. Thank you.
So that from Undisputed earlier today. Yeah, between Shannon Sharp and
Poor
Skip
Jen.
Bayless. So, Chad, when you saw
Thoughts
that.
and prayers, guys.
When you saw that, what'd you think?
Thoughts and prayers. I thought a lot of things. So first, I believe it's real, that interaction there that we just saw to start the show. There's a lot of people asking, is it a work? Is it, because you're right, it's a show that's built on, people hating each other, just, shouting back and forth.
Disagreements.
And
Arguments.
It's contrived, at times, phony outrage about sports issues to argue with each other. We know the formula. It clearly works because Skip Bayless and Shannon Sharp make a ton of money doing what they do. And Skip Bayless is a paid contrarian. That's what he does. He doesn't follow anyone on social media. He wants to put out his opinions and get you angry about it so you'll tune into his show, and that's what he's always done. I don't think there's I'm sure some very genuine opinions with him. I don't think all of them are overly genuine. But I watched that and I think it's real. I also think that Skip Bayless is lying when he says no one there had a problem with it, because on the previous day's show, he admitted he only sent the follow-up tweet because an hour after he sent it, one of his bosses said, you need to clarify what you meant with the tweet because it's getting a huge reaction. And that's why he sent the follow-up tweet. So for him to say, well, no one here had a problem with it, I think he's just not really telling the truth when that's his response to Shannon Sharp. So it's real, though.
He said no one had a problem to the point where he's saying he wasn't told to address it on the show yesterday, which is why Shannon Sharp missed, right?
Yeah, and here's the other thing I think about it. You show up and do your job.
Yeah. I agree.
I don't know,
I agree with that.
Shannon Sharp opening by saying, I missed yesterday's show. There's a lot of opinion and conjecture on why I missed. I'm not going to get into that. What?
What?
I mean, I'm sorry, but everyone who watched that, I mean, if you are Damar Hamlin's family member, then you're not going to work for a while. You're going to be there. But everyone else like us that works in sports media has to talk about the tough stories. I didn't enjoy watching the guy down on the field with no heartbeat like everyone else didn't. Well, you know what we did? What did we do, Hutton?
We came in and did the show and discussed it.
I just don't buy that as an excuse of, even if he comes back and says, I was bothered by it, so I didn't. No, I think what he's trying to get to is, I didn't want the show to be about Skip in his tweet.
Right.
So I decided to not come in and do the show. I wish he just would have said that. Instead of getting into opinion conjecture, I'll tell you exactly why I wasn't here. I wasn't going to take part in a charade about his tweet because I disagree with it. Say that and get it out of the way to start the show. And then have a discussion about what Skip meant with the tweet and everything else. But for the debate of real or fake, Hutton, I think this was very much real.
Yeah, I do too. I think,
and you typically go with it's staged with a lot of things, but not with us.
That show is, but I don't think that was staged at all, given his reaction to Skip jumping in the middle of his opening monologue there. But yeah, I mean, my guess is 3 segments later they had a very scripted segment.
Yeah,
one side was taken, the other it's not genuine.
They got right back to doing what they do on the show. And I'll also say, I mean, just etiquette of hosting a show, and we've done this for many years now. If someone comes in with something they really want to say, and they start the show with, is it Jen is the woman's name who is leading them?
Yes.
Which I also think is she in the same studio, or is she
Clearly
on
not.
Zoom?
Clearly not.
Yeah, the delay was weird when she comes back with the thoughts and prayers after they have that little skirmish. But anyway, it's not her fault. If you open the show by saying, hey, Shannon, I know there's something you want to say, and he addresses the camera and has a monologue ready, in no way should any broadcaster or any part of a show jump in on that to disagree with something as they're talking about it.
I don't think Skip
and not
knew,
giving them a chance to continue to explain.
I don't think he would have jumped in had he not mentioned Skip's tweet and that he hopes he takes it down. He's like, no, I'm not taking it down.
Yeah, well,
and no one here wants me to take it down either.
Yeah, my point is he could have waited till he was done with his thought, because he was starting to say something else. He said even though I wanted him to take it down, he was going to complete his thought, and Skip jumped the gun and jumped in. Look, it led to compelling television.
Yes.
For FS1. I mean, everyone is talking about that clip today and tweeting out that link. I'm sure we've got a story up at OutKick.com about it also. I think it's very much real. I don't think it's particularly professional of Shannon Sharpe or Skip Bayless in this situation. For Shannon Sharpe to no-show on his own show because he didn't like something someone tweeted and didn't want to talk about it is unprofessional. And for Skip Bayless to say one day that his boss told him to clarify with another tweet and then come back the next day and say, oh, no one here had a problem with it, I think also is pretty unprofessional. But what do I know? I don't make nearly as much as those guys.
Coming up, Armando Salguero is going to join us in a matter of minutes to discuss what the NFL just said about their options with the Bengals and Bills and how we move forward now with Week 18. But what could happen and what's likely with all of this? That will be coming up. Plus, we'll hit the other headlines of the day and a sentiment from one college coach about where we're headed with football and everything devoted to football versus off-the-field issues. That's next on OutKick 360.
College football's in trouble. There's a lot of people trying to keep it from happening.
I think it's a general consensus across the college football landscape. We want to play football.
College football is a huge part of the fall. It's a huge part of Americana itself.
It just really felt like people in the country needed college football to just feel a little sense of normal.
Big news from the Big Ten as the conference releasing its 10-game football schedule.
We go home thinking there's going to be practice the next day. Everybody gets a text, stay home, everything's canceled.
Big Ten fall football season has been canceled.
We just believe collectively there's too much uncertainty.
I guess what I'm trying to understand, though, Kevin, is that was the same position you had 6 days ago.
The Big Ten is an unmitigated disaster.
There was a ton of confusion. There was presidents saying one thing, there was coaches saying another.
Players had to be silent, coaches had to be silent, ADs had to be silent.
People said, how does what you just did make any sense?
And nobody really knew what the heck happened when they voted to cancel the season.
You make this huge historical announcement, and then Kevin Warren never does a press conference to explain it. It was like a masterclass in how not to handle a crisis.
The word really that was lacking in all of this is transparency.
It felt like a lot of stuff was happening behind closed doors.
Even today, we still don't know what occurred.
So you don't tell us parents, that's fine, but you're not telling the young men that it affects.
We have to make a decision to save the season. What about the history books? What about the rivalry games? What about Paul Bunyan's axe? How is that not going to go to a team this year?
This is a failure of epic magnitude. The Big Ten presidents and leaders should be held accountable for the disastrous decisions that they're making.
Then the commissioner doubles down, saying his decision will not be revisited.
And that's the point. It felt like a war was declared on the Big Ten and Kevin Warren.
Everything turned political.
Because if this is medical, then you would have stopped the game of football a long time ago.
I think the Big Ten leaders will tell you that they probably made a mistake in hindsight.
If I had the chance to do it all over last year, I would make the same decisions that we made.
Damar Hamlin remains in critical condition in ICU in Cincinnati. But the team, the Buffalo Bills, did release some good news earlier today. OutKick 360 rolls on. Damar remains in the ICU critical condition with signs of improvement, noted yesterday and overnight. He's expected to remain under intensive care as his health care team continues to monitor and treat him. So that's more in step and in line with positive than anything negative.
Signs of improvement is good.
Yeah, can be construed there. So that's great. Earlier, Jordan Rooney, who's the family spokesperson as part of the marketing team, he gave the update on Hamlin and said, quote, "I can't speak specifically on his medical condition. All I can say is he's fighting. He's a fighter. The family's in good spirits. We're honestly just taking it minute by minute, hour by hour. What's most important is give the family their privacy. His family is going through a lot right now." But he did go on to say that based on that report from the Bills, he said that's accurate. There has been improvement in the signs that the doctors wanted to see. They were pleased with what they saw overnight. No details, though.
Yeah, it's getting strange that we're not getting any details involved. But I mean, the improvement's a good word to put in there, right? I feel like we're about to reach the time where they're going to have either the doctor releasing a statement or the family saying more. in detail, so I'm a little hesitant to get overly optimistic or excited until I hear more details. But hearing the word improvement does give me a little bit more reassurance.
Yeah, it's like they're still walking that tightrope.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
and they don't want to say one thing or the other for fear that, you know, it could go the opposite way in any direction there. Armando Salguero is about to join us because the news, they just held a conference call with NFL personnel. I believe Jeff Miller was on the call. And maybe one or two others, but for sure, NFL Executive Vice President for Communications, Jeff Miller, was there. And he was discussing and has tried to lay out everything that they're going through with the process in regards to, are they going to play this game after Week 18 or are they not? And it's still up in the air. Troy Vincent, who was on the call, said literally this morning we began to dive into the possibility of not playing the game at all. And that's what, Chad, you and I got into about, 15, 20 minutes ago, is if you don't, how do you determine tiebreakers if you just say, hey, this is a no contest? Because it was very difficult for me to find anything in regards to a no contest with the NFL tie-breaking rules. You can find things on ties, and if you have 2 or 3 teams tied and how you go about trying to break that tie, either for a number 1 seed, conference, or a potential division winner. You know, there's a set protocol in place with the bylaws. In this case, they're having to come up with it this week and having to determine what they're going to do moving forward. And he did admit, Troy Vincent did admit, hey, this is not going to be fair for everyone. There's no perfect system given this situation if we choose not to play this game.
Yeah, and I think that's the big point, you know, we were discussing, Hutton, is someone's going to be left out here, right? I mean, there's just no way around it at this point in time, even if it's the Bills and the Bengals having to come back and play a week later on a weekend by themselves.
Yeah.
And then you have those teams that get the bye, you know, some of them waiting 3 weeks to play a game. There's no easy solution to this. There's no simple solution that factors in everyone and, you know, make sure everyone's going to be okay.
And, you know, there has to be some type of compromise with that. Armando Salguero joins us. He was a part of this call with the NFL. Armando, great coverage as always at OutKick. All options are on the table. That's what the league is saying. How many options are there that they're referring to?
Well, option 1 is they don't play and they don't make the game up, right? And I'm not saying option 1 as in that's their first option. I'm saying option 1 as in I'm giving you the first option according to me. So that's option 1. They don't play. They go forward with whatever games are played this week. The Buffalo Bills will play the New England Patriots this week. The Cincinnati Bengals will play the Baltimore Ravens this week. What happens after that could be up in the air. They both could end up with a 12-4 record, which suggests to me that if the NFL is considering to going with winning percentage, that doesn't help, especially if the Bills and the Bengals have to play each other and someone has to decide where that game is played. They would have the same winning percentage and they will not have finished the suspended game, so there is no head-to-head. The other option is to play the week after the final, regular season games are played, either on a Thursday maybe or next Sunday. That would kind of trigger the moving back of the entire playoff schedule. In other words, wild card weekend, which begins not this weekend, but the following weekend, it now goes back a week because next weekend what we get is the Bills and the Bengals. Then divisional round weekend goes back a week. Then conference championship games go back a week. And where we make it all up so that the Super Bowl is played as scheduled, I believe is February 12th, is that they do not have the Super Bowl bye week, so to speak. In other words, the extra week between the conference championship games and the Super Bowl, that goes away, and we just end the season on the 12th as scheduled.
And see, many are pointing to that as a perfect solution. But Armando, as you pointed out, there is no perfect solution here because in that scenario, there's guaranteed to be one, maybe two teams that would be out and not playing for 21 days, 20 to 21 days. Philadelphia and potentially Kansas City would be in that same boat.
That is true. I don't know, man. Where I come from in my country, in Cuba, we have this thing called scrimmages, and teams can scrimmage against themselves if they want to. And if there is some team that won 13, 14 games that's going to complain about not playing for 2 weeks or 3 weeks, have at it, because I know a lot of teams would rather have it that way than playing every single week for the last, what is it? The last buys were a month ago, and they would be going 2.5 months without stopping. So pick your poison.
So how much time is needed to make this decision? I know they said in the coming days. Like, does that mean they're going to wait and see the results of Week 18, or does that mean we'll know what's going? I know we don't necessarily know for a fact how long, but I mean, you've got to make sure you have a process in place and you have stadiums available for all these teams that are going to be hosting playoff games.
Yeah, that's interesting, Jonathan, because look, the NFL is a deadline league, right? And the deadline is Sunday evening. That's the deadline. And the reason that that's the deadline is because it's Sunday evening, we will know the results of all the games. And my guess is that the NFL at that point will see exactly where the Kansas City Chiefs stand, exactly where the Buffalo Bills stand, exactly where the Cincinnati Bengals stand, and figure out a solution based off of that. If the Bengals have no shot of getting the number 1 seed, or the Bills have no shot of getting the number 1 seed, then the problem is solved and they can indeed postpone the game, because Kansas City, come what may, from a Bengals-Bills matchup, would still be the number 1 seed. So that game is moot. It would change nothing. And so therefore, why play it?
Are you still in Cincy?
I am. You like my hotel? It's
blurred out. Yeah.
So what has coverage been like in the last couple of day and a half as you've stuck around to cover Damar Hamlin and just the reaction to all of this and the news that's coming out of this?
Yeah, it's an interesting assignment. So basically, I go back and forth between the hotel and the hospital, which is where the story is. And sometimes you get family members that come out. Yesterday, Uncle D, Dorian Glenn, who is Damar Hamlin's uncle, came out and spoke about, his situation. And they drove from Pittsburgh on Monday night, Tuesday morning. They packed 2 cars and headed this way. And also the aunts came out. Bills Mafia, which is the Bills fans, they're everywhere. And they have set up a little kind of like a shrine, a memorial to Damar. There's a number 3. There's a flag. There's a Bills flag. They light candles. They have candlelight vigils. There was 2 of them yesterday. It's kind of interesting. Today I met this gentleman who was from Detroit. And he was standing right in front of that Bills memorial to Damar with a 10-foot cross that he built and brought in his F-150 from Detroit so that, he could help people and be a kind of a beacon of faith for everyone who wanted to, come to the cross and pray and, feel whatever they needed to feel to make them feel better. Look, we had this episode in 2001. on September 11th. And I'm not saying this is that, right? Because the loss of life then was unthinkable and unimaginable, and there has been no loss of life now. But there are events in our lives that force people to go to their faith and whatever faith they may have, and kind of lean on that. And I would say to you that this is one of those, because there's not been one person who I've talked to in this whole entire time that hasn't talked about praying for Damar. Even every single NFL team has put up a Twitter, their Twitter picture, their avatar is pray for Damar. Yesterday on ESPN, you've got one of the co-hosts praying for Damar. And God bless him, man. There's a lot of things wrong with this country. That's right about this country, in my opinion. People having faith and showing it and wanting to lift up a guy who needs help, and we can't help him necessarily. If we can find that help in prayer, let's do it.
Amen. So how many media members stayed back? You're obviously a national media member that's there. I'm sure there's others. But how many of the Bills media actually stayed back in Cincinnati to cover this story and not go back with the team, Armando?
Yeah, there's a couple of Bills media that are still here. Obviously, ESPN is here. NFL Network is here. And then all of the local, Cincinnati channels and publications are here. So, and what they've all done, most of them, is they've set up little tents under which they hang out until there's something to report or they've got a hit for their respective network or channel. I don't have a tent. I did not pack my tent for this trip because I did not expect to need a tent for this trip. So if it rains, I'm out there without a tent. If it's sunny, I'm out there without a tent. And it's not about me. It's about a damn tent. I need to go shopping for a tent here in the next few days.
Well, I'm going to get on Amazon during the break. How long are you going to be there? And we'll send you one on behalf of the show.
Right. Thank you for that. Yeah. No, actually, I believe that either today or tomorrow will be my last day here.
Okay.
We are expecting OutKick is going to and has requested a credential to cover the Bills game on Sunday against the Patriots.
And I believe that's the Jim Nantz Romo game, is it not?
I'm not sure who's doing the play-by-play.
I think that's Nantz, Romo, and Wolfson. I think, the national spotlight will be on that game for sure, without question. Armando, great coverage with this. Thanks for the insight. And who knows? In the coming days, we'll know exactly what's going to be the playoff picture. But most importantly, hopefully, sooner than days, plural, we'll have a better outlook for however Damar Hamlin's recovering right now.
Indeed. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, man. Armando Salguero there. Great update there and more at OutKick.com. Coming up, Clay Travis joins us. We'll discuss Damar Hamlin. We'll get into the college football playoff. Titans, Jags playing for the AFC South crown. All of that and more straight ahead on OutKick 360.
Man, just getting into the craziness. We've got the college football playoff championship game coming up on Monday. But looking back, your opinion, semifinal Saturday was just so wild, and getting to watch these games and coming down to the wire and the back and forth. Let's start off with Michigan TCU. You got Max Duggan and the way that he played, Jim Harbaugh and his squad. It just seemed like they kind of laxed out there in the middle, and TCU took advantage. And what were your takeaways of how TCU is now playing for a national championship?
I was pretty stunned that it happened and pretty stunned by the way it happened. So I guess going in, if you were to tell me an upset's going to happen, not the craziest thing in the world. I didn't expect it, but it's not a wild concept that a 9-point favorite or underdog can win a game. When you start to see it play out and you realize, Michigan has these weapons that have gotten them to where they are, and they are electing not to use those weapons. Inside zone was a figment of your imagination in that game. Just didn't happen. Therefore, using J.J. McCarthy's legs really didn't happen. The way that you had seen it happen earlier in the season, using Donovan Edwards down inside the 5, where they got inside twice and scored 0 points from those trips, didn't happen. So I was sort of incredulous watching how it was unfolding. So here's what's funny. We were at the Peach Bowl, and that game's getting ready to happen, and I was on the field watching warm-ups, and I was standing there talking. Let me whisper. I was standing there talking with Urban Meyer, and he is watching the video board along with a lot of the other Ohio State staffers. And so it's kind of always a surreal environment. If you've ever been at that late playoff game, the early game's happening as your game's getting warmed up. And if you're in a stadium that has a big video board, like Mercedes-Benz has that ribbon board, it's on and the players can see it. And certainly the fans are reacting. So when TCU would score, Urban Meyer's just like going crazy, like a pure fanboy, just cheering like openly. And you're seeing some of the players on the field acknowledge it. And you're seeing some of the staffers on the sideline acknowledge it and like cheer. And all the while you're saying, hold on, we got a game that's going to kick off here in an hour. I'm not saying they weren't focused. I'm just saying it was a weird dynamic. But yeah, watching that unfold, and then just you knew what was immediately going to come after that. And that was Michigan lost. Okay, now we start up the Jim Harbaugh NFL rumor train, and that's going on even as we speak. So I was a little dumbfounded, to be honest with you. Not that they lost, but the manner in which they lost.
Is that going to transition? And I know we'll get into Georgia here in just a minute, but we've seen teams in the past where they get all up for one game and they put it all on the line. And then come that second game, and I'm not even just talking about playoffs. I could be talking about regular season as well. Can TCU do that again? Can they have that same type of energy? Can they play that same type of defense, and which was lacking in the third quarter? But I'm saying, can they get up for that type of game one more time?
I don't doubt they'll be up, but there are things that have to happen. You can call it disrespecting TCU if you want to. I fully respect the program, but we got to be real here. We're talking about a 12 or 13-point spread for a reason. There are things Georgia would have to do to assist them. Football happens that way sometimes. It just happened in the Michigan game. Michigan did some things to assist them. Credit TCU for grabbing the game and taking it. If Georgia doesn't do that, no, I don't think any amount of hype or being up will matter, because Georgia's a better team than you. They're that much better than you. If you can start to pull them out into the deeper end of making some mistakes, whether they be self-inflicted or whether you can steal a possession or two, onside kicks, fake punts, etc., all of which I think will have to be pulled out of the bag by TCU in this game.
OutKick 360 rolls on across the OutKick Network. Glad you're with us. Joined by Clay Travis. Joins us each week at this time. The president, founder of OutKick. And, of course, you can catch him with Clay and Buck as well. Clay, hope you're well. Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you guys. Everything's going well. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, same here. Same here. The coverage of the Damar Hamlin cardiac arrest, Chad and I have been discussing this the last 2 days. We've never seen anything like this in regards to the incident, the collapse happening in the middle of the field. All the medical personnel is there. They immediately take him to the hospital. There's no sideline reports going on. There's really no information. Were you as glued to the TV as we were?
Yeah, I was. Like most people, watched the Rose Bowl, or most sports fans, I guess, watched the Rose Bowl between Utah and Penn State, and then flipped on Monday Night Football because I was looking forward to seeing Josh Allen against Joe Burrow in the battle to see who's going to be the number one seed in the AFC. Certainly the pivot occurred rapidly from, sports as entertainment to life and death story. And frankly, from that moment forward, I mean, I think I was on Fox News, 3 different hits that evening. And I've, kind of been doing media all over the place ever since, traditional non-sports media, right? Yeah. Megyn Kelly's show, Laura Ingram's show, podcast-wise. So this is a story that translated or transcended sports and went into the larger cultural ecosystem in a way, frankly, that most sports stories don't necessarily do. It took what ordinarily is the front page of the sports section and put it on the front page of the newspaper.
Clay, I feel like when something like this happens, oftentimes people go in search of a villain with all of this, and that villain was presented in Skip Bayless with his tweet. Yeah. Curious about your thoughts on the reaction to his tweet, then what's happened on their show. It's a weird thing because when I first read it, I had to do a double take on what everyone was so outraged about because the way the tweet ended. Hutton even brought up the point that if they just would have flipped the start to the end of the tweet, it would have been a little bit softer, what he was saying and the way it was interpreted.
The same way.
What was your reaction to it?
Yeah, so the internet's a blame factory. I think I wrote about this in one of my books. And once you understand that basic premise, so much of what goes on the internet makes sense, right? Event happens. Doesn't matter what the event happens that goes viral, that a lot of people care about, and then blame is immediately assessed. And so obviously no one is in favor of anyone being hurt in a general sense, right? So everyone is wishing Damar Hamlin well, wants him to get healthy. So everyone sees that happen. And actually OutKick was evidently one of the first places to get targeted before Skip took all the oxygen out of the social media balloon of outrage, because we shared a video of the player collapsing after the hit. And people are like, oh my God, how in the world do you put that up? And, I'm like, 100%. I mean, I think I retweeted it. I'm always of the opinion that you should share the primary source material. This has happened for a while in sports. The first time I really remember it was the Kevin Ware broken leg, if you guys remember that at Louisville.
Yes, we talked about it earlier today.
Was just where everybody immediately on the internet simultaneously was like, oh my goodness, how dare you share that video? And that one was, somewhat graphic, but this, I think you had to share it, because my position on it is, only 15 or 20 million people are watching the game when it happens and see that live video incident. And then you're talking about something that lots of people have never seen. And so I think allowing people to see what the news is important to allowing them to understand what happened and to further contextualize their opinions going forward. But this happens in sports media all the time. You have to have the exact same opinion as everyone else. And if you stray a little bit outside the boundaries of acceptable opinion, it's an emotional place, and people want to react emotionally, and they're angry and they're upset, and they want to transfer that anger and that upset and sometimes that fear, depending on what the powerful emotion is, to someone who they believe steps outside the lines of what acceptable discourse is. I saw Skip's tweet. I immediately knew that it was going to be controversial. I don't even think that, he is in the controversy business, but I don't think when he drafted that tweet, he was thinking that it was that controversial. To you guys' point, if you reverse the order and you started with that question, And oh, by the way, I think it's something that everybody is naturally thinking about, right?
Yes.
Okay, if they cancel the game, how do you figure out who is going to be the overall number one seed in the AFC? That's not because you're rooting for the player to have something bad happen to him. Everybody wants, like, I used to go on my show all the time and say, hey, just for the record, I'm anti-death. Like, and I used to have to say this all the time during the COVID era when people were like, oh, we got to shut down schools. We got to shut down every business. You should never leave your house. You can't go to the beach. You can't go for a hike. You can't go to the gym, which, by the way, was the exact opposite evidence now, opposite advice of what we should have been giving, right? If we want to mandate anything, we should have tried to mandate exercise because number one way to fight COVID is to be healthy. But larger context, people were like, oh, you want everybody's grandma to die. Like, no, I wish everybody's grandma lived forever, right? I'm very pro-grandma. I don't know that anybody's loved grandmas and grandpas more than me in the recorded history of sports media. So I'm anti-death, right? Like, I wish no one ever died. But we have to figure out in some way, if we're going to crown a Super Bowl champion, how to deal with a game being suspended and not played. So what he was guilty of is asking a question that many people were thinking at a time when it was not considered appropriate to be asking that question on social media, right? A day later, everybody would be, immediately kind of step in and have an opinion. 20 minutes after the collapse, people are like, they want to be angry at someone. They were angry that we posted video. The sea is angry, my friend, I think was a George Costanza theme. But whenever there's something that goes viral like this and it's an awful story, people are looking to channel that anger at someone, at something. It's interesting. Today, I just shared a few videos. Now football is the target, right? Football is the reason that Hamlin was injured. Is football too dangerous? I just saw that question asked of Joe Biden. This is kind of inevitable. You knew that this was going to be where we would lead from Hamlin being injured. And by the way, we still don't know exactly what happened, what medical condition occurred by which he had the heart attack and had to get CPR on the field. So far as I know, there still hasn't been. There's been speculation from doctors about what might have happened. I heard Dr. Chow on your show and, give an idea of what might happen. Credit, which I very rarely seen given, by the way, to all the medical staff and everybody who reacted in real time to be able to get out there and give Hamlin the best possible medical condition and treatment. But look, I think the NFL has three options now, right, as it goes forward, as it pertains to who the number one seed in the AFC is going to be. One, they can just basically pretend this game never happened, and both the Bengals and the Bills play 17 games, and you say, okay, whatever happens there happens. And that could mean that if the Kansas City Chiefs win this weekend, even though the Bills beat the Chiefs on the road in Kansas City, I believe the math is that the Chiefs would get to 14-3, and therefore they would be the overall number one seed because the best that the Bills could do was 13-3, right? You could give a tie, which then gives credit to the game for the time that was played, but also ends up in the same result, right? Where the best case scenario for the Bills at that point would be 13-3-1. And also, you could decide to, in some way, postpone the season if this game ends up mattering in terms of giving us an indication of who the number one seed is going to be. Maybe you play it at the end of the season. I think probably what the NFL is hoping right now is that the situation, takes care of itself and somebody wins or somebody loses who's not expected to. And this game is not needing to be the arbiter as to who the number one seed is. I also think further on this is when you only have one bye. If there were two teams that were going to get a bye and the Bills and the Chiefs were both going to get a bye, then I think that most people would say, okay, this doesn't feel like it's 100% appropriate, but it's better than the result of the Chiefs advancing and becoming the one seed, getting the bye and the home field, which is a tremendous competitive advantage as a result of what happened in this game. So I think the NFL, I just laid out, that's basically their three options. And we'll have to see what they could do. I guess I could add a fourth, and I haven't seen anybody suggest this, but they could expand the playoffs and give another team a bye, right? So that you had double byes as a result of this. But I think changing the layout of the playoffs is challenging as it is already is. So I think they're in a tough spot, and it's one that we certainly have not seen a precedent for before.
Clay Travis with us on OutKick 360, streaming at OutKick.com. Clay, for those, maybe there's someone that came up to you and said, hey, I didn't watch the college football playoff. Maybe someone like Buck Sexton, for instance. How would you describe the college football playoff for someone who didn't watch it last weekend?
Well, I mean, I think it was exhilarating, and I'm a college football fan first and foremost, and I thought the back-to-back games was probably the best way that you could spend 8 hours as a sports fan possible. Both those games were electric. You didn't know from one play to the next what might happen. The fact that the kick went off right at midnight on the East Coast was almost incredible. And I was actually texting with some buddies, and a lot of people, sports fans are interesting because they presume that everybody else is a sports fan the same way they're a sports fan. And diehard sports fans are actually a minority pretty substantially of the overall population. So a lot of people come in. I always like to use this example. No matter how popular the NFC and the AFC championship game is, at most around 50 million people will watch, right? That's a lot of people, but around 50 million people will watch the AFC and the NFC championship game. I always do. Sure you guys do. Sure most of the people watching or listening to us right now do as well. And then another 50 million plus people show up and watch the Super Bowl. So I'm always like, you didn't care enough to watch to see who got to the Super Bowl. But once we got to the Super Bowl, a whole nother 50 million people come in and are willing to pay attention. Well, the college football playoff is a little bit like that version of college football, where, the most watched, and I think I'm right about this, college football game of the year, around 13 million people watched it. I think that was the Michigan-Ohio State game, if I'm not mistaken. And then over 21 million people. And by the way, it's a little bit of an unfair comparison because Michigan-Ohio State's on free television on Fox, and the college football national championship and the playoff games are on ESPN, which is cable. But around 21 or 22 million people came in and watched the playoff. Well, who are these extra 9 million people, right? So a lot of them are just casual fans, and a lot of those casual fans were sitting around at home with their kids and their wives and maybe some friends because it's New Year's Eve. And they promised that they were going to have the ball on when it dropped because everybody wants to kiss somebody and dance around and celebrate New Year's. And suddenly the game ran right into with the time that the ball was going to drop. And I bet there was more panicked changing of the channel and everything else for that than almost any sporting event that's ever occurred in history.
It's funny. Granted, I was in the Central Time Zone, but I wasn't even thinking about that.
The ball hit the ground right as the ball hit zero.
You're definitely looking at that. Clay Travis.
Oh, yeah. It happened literally at the exact same time. Yeah. Now, I was out in Utah at the time, so I was 2 hours behind. So, I wouldn't have put on the ball dropping anyway. I don't particularly, once you've seen that, I mean, it's kind of, the kids might enjoy it or whatever. And we watched at 11, I think, and at 12 out on the Mountain Time Zone. But, oh, yeah, this was if you go into my comments, because I tweeted about it almost instantaneously, there are a lot of people that are out there battling over the remote control on New Year's Eve. And, yeah, if you're a diehard, maybe you've got yourself down in your bunker watching the game and you don't care and even notice what time it is on the clock. But there are a lot of casual fans who flip around, and for them, that was a war for the ages, I would imagine.
We know there was no battle with Buck Sexton. He was definitely watching the ball drop. There was nothing about football being watched with him. Clay Travis, OutKick founder, on with us right now. Clay, your wife Laura may have a better answer to this question, but do you think we've seen the last of Jim Harbaugh as Michigan's head coach?
I think I certainly have a better answer to that than her. She might have a better answer about my clothing options for the inaugural ball last night in Florida. But I don't know. I mean, I think it's about the options that he has. And I think, frankly, he can go out a champ now. I know people are upset that Michigan lost to TCU. But if you had told Michigan fans 5 minutes before kickoff of the Ohio State game, hey, you guys are going to win this game by 20 plus, but you're going to lose to whoever you play in the first round of the college football playoff. As long as they had known that opponent was not going to be Ohio State in the playoff, I think they would have signed up for that in a heartbeat. And that's because the Michigan-Ohio State game is so huge. And now Harbaugh has won it back-to-back years, and he's won the Big Ten back-to-back years. But I think the fact that they required him to take a pay cut and sort of cut his legs out from underneath him like they did has continued to linger. And I think you're going to see this happen more and more going forward, which is NIL is making college football coaching a lot more like the NFL than it is college, because you're constantly managing your roster. You're constantly having to recruit and figure out how much you're going to pay this guy and how paying this guy that is going to impact someone going forward. And so I can see why someone would look back and, if you're Jim Harbaugh, and just say, man, the reason I came into college was because the players have to listen to me, because you are the, unquestioned general of the college football team. I think that's why Nick Saban likes college way more than the NFL, because there's much less of a power dynamic at play. Quarterback, if he's a stud, is far more popular and powerful than the head coach in the NFL. That's just the reality. And so if you're a college football coach, it's becoming much more like the NFL. And I can see why an NFL coach might say, a college football coach might say, well, at least in the NFL, everything is even, right? It's really more about X's and O's because everybody has the same salary cap. Everybody has the same rules as it pertains to the draft. And I think, honestly, you can have more of a life in the NFL than you can in college football, which sounds crazy, but I think it's much less of an all-encompassing job because you aren't responsible. In college, on some level, it feels like you are not only now responsible on the same level as an NFL GM and head coach, but unlike in the NFL, where if a player gets in trouble and the phone rings at 2 a.m., nobody's like, oh, of course it's the Dallas Cowboys. Look at the culture they've created. Most of the time, the player's responsible for his actions. Most people don't blame the team. And so that's the scenario I think that a lot of them are grappling with. So it would not shock me at all if Harbaugh leaves.
Clay, you brought up the phrase power dynamic, and that's what I think about when I think of Jimbo Fisher hiring Bobby Petrino as offensive coordinator at Texas A&M. Bobby Petrino spent less than a month as offensive coordinator at UNLV. Now he's going to be working with and for Jimbo Fisher. Clay, those are two strong-willed guys, and Bobby Petrino is now working for Jimbo Fisher. I don't know how that's going to work, but I do know that Bobby Petrino is one heck of an offensive coach. What did you make of the move?
I think it probably is going to work really well. I mean, you're right. The power dynamic, the struggle there could be interesting. But if you look at the numbers and you just tell Bobby Petrino, hey, all you have to do is worry about the offensive side of the ball, he's a wizard there. And I think Jimbo Fisher, who had a reputation as really a offensive, stalwart, has really stumbled. And this is his opportunity to kind of say, hey, I'm going to be the overall manager, the CEO of Texas A&M Football, Inc., and somebody else can manage the intricacies of the offensive and defensive sides of the ball. And I think it's a sign, frankly, simultaneously, if this makes sense, of both weakness and strength, because in hiring Bobby Petrino, what Jimbo Fisher is acknowledging is that his offensive play calling and success has been a weakness of the team, but it's simultaneously a sign of strength to bring in someone who is incredibly accomplished to work under you because you're confident enough of your power that you're not worried about them usurping it.
Clay, Titans Jags for the AFC South Championship. How bad could it get, and what's your expectation for Saturday between these two?
Well, I actually think the Titans got a real benefit because they basically rested everybody that was a little bit dinged up on Thursday against the Cowboys, and now they get the opportunity to play in a short week against the Jags, and they got to play at home on Thursday. Now they get to play on Saturday in Jacksonville, whereas Jacksonville had to travel on Sunday. If I were them, I would be upset about the way that the schedule got laid out because it seems very unfair. Having said that, look, Trevor Lawrence is infinitely better than Josh Dobbs, and so I would expect for the Jags to find a way to win before all is said and done. I think maybe the last tidbit of the John Robinson era, the kick in the teeth, is basically acknowledging this Malik Willis experiment is a disaster and there's no point in sticking with it. And you got a guy who's only been on the team for 13 days or whatever the heck it is, now in charge of trying to go win the AFC South. I also think that as much as it's, a disappointing season, I think the Titans are in a rough spot because if Trevor Lawrence continues to develop like he is, it might be a long time before the Titans are in a position to be able to win this division. Because I think the Jags are going to be pretty good for years to come.
Yeah, and I think they've handled it well throughout this stretch. Playing the starters last week, I realized the 6-day deal, and that I don't know why the NFL did that to them. But the killer mentality for a young team, Peterson, I think, made the right call, and they throttled Houston in a meaningless game.
It's been do or die for them for a while now, so why not keep it going?
Yeah, I like Jacksonville.
Yeah, and I also think, by the way, when you look at making the playoffs, there's two kinds of way to make the playoffs. Right? There's, hey, we're taking the next step to make the playoffs, and it's a big deal, and our run to potentially contend for a championship begins now, which is where I think the Jags are right now. And then there's, hey, we made the playoffs, and now's the time to prove that we're good enough to advance to a Super Bowl, which is where I think the Titans have been the last 3 years. And why I thought the loss to the Bengals was so devastating was because it might be 20 years before you have that opportunity again. And people say, oh, that's hyperbole. I don't think so. If you look at the youth and quarterbacks in the AFC right now, Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, if Trevor Lawrence is advancing like he is, Lamar Jackson, Justin Herbert. I mean, I think I just named 6. That's almost half the AFC that right now looks like they may have really good young quarterbacks for a decade or more to helm up their team. And that's not even counting Tua. We'll see what ends up happening with Tua. Kenny Pickett has shown flashes in Pittsburgh. The AFC is overwhelmingly stocked with quarterbacks of young pedigree in a way that the NFC isn't. And so that to me is why it's, quite disappointing if you're a fan of the Titans or if you're a fan of one of those teams. By the way, I didn't even mention Deshaun Watson. We'll see if he can ever return to any level of excellence. But I don't know that we've ever had as many good quarterbacks in the AFC as we do right now. And almost all of them are, 27 or 28 and younger. Whereas if you look at the NFC right now, Aaron Rodgers is still playing at a very high level, Tom Brady. But there's a relative paucity. And by the way, I didn't even mention Russell Wilson, who I think most people would have said was a top 10 quarterback. He's also in the AFC. There's just a substantial signal caller imbalance if you look at the quality of quarterback in the NFC versus the AFC. And I think it's going to be an incredible battle for the next 10 or 15 years based on the youth of many of these guys.
Clay, I'm looking at OutKick.com/bet. Final 60 seconds here. 13.5. How are you betting TCU Georgia on Monday?
I haven't decided on that. I kind of feel I'm of two minds. Either this is going to be an absolute battle down to the last second, like we saw in the Ohio State game against Georgia, or Georgia's going to come out and beat them, like 42-10 or something like that. And I haven't decided which of those two most likely outcomes I'm going to embrace by the time Monday gets here.
I hope it's just like the semis. Yeah, I doubt Georgia comes out.
I hope it's a great game.
Yeah.
Certainly, I'm rooting for a great game, but you can't just gamble based on hope.
Right.
I've done that enough in my life. You got to figure out what you think the numbers are going to reflect.
I mean, after Brock Bowers levitated and Stetson Bennett became Roger Staubach again, I don't think Georgia can lose. I just think they're not going to lose. So I don't know what the game looks like, but Georgia's going to win this game.
The talent level, I'm big on not looking at individual players, but just looking at the overall 4 and 5 stars on roster. Ohio State, Alabama, and Georgia were the 3 by far most talented teams coming into college football season. Obviously, Alabama lost 2 close games, didn't make it into the playoff. But I think Georgia is just so far above TCU in terms of talent that it would take a poor performance from them. And I thought, frankly, Ohio State played almost a perfect game against Georgia and still couldn't win. And I thought Georgia just played okay until, like you said, the last 10 minutes or so. But I think Georgia will play much better against TCU. And I think that Duggan would have to have the greatest game of his life in order to find a way for TCU to win.
Clay, thank you, man. We appreciate it, and we'll catch up soon.
All right, sounds good. See y'all.
All right, there's Clay Travis. Coming up, we'll recap the show, give you the very latest from just the news of the day with Damar Hamlin and more on OutKick 360.
Back to the Christian thing in the broad picture. Your father, how many kids, if you don't mind saying, do you have several kids? One kid?
Seven children.
You have 7 children, so you're a big family man. I did not know that.
Yes.
How many sons? Because this is what I kind of want to dig into.
I have 5 sons.
5 sons, perfect. As a Christian man, how do you feel like, what is your job when it comes to raising young men in modern America?
Number one, to teach my boys to know and love Jesus. That would be their primary identity in life. To everything else being completely secondary to that. That is number one. Number 2 would be to make them capable men, right? To make them well-rounded, to make them, able to handle themselves, to make them strong physically, able to fight, able to shoot, able to protect their future, their own families. A great quote, Robert Heinlein, and I'm going to butcher it, but I will attempt it anyways. He basically says that, a man should be able to plan an invasion, change a diaper, cook a meal, build a house, he just goes down this list of, you should be able to do all these things as a man. And then at the very end, he says specialization is for insects. And I did not always think that. All right. I mean, there was times in my life where I didn't care about learning how to weld or be mechanically inclined or any of these other things. I was like, oh, I just want to be a commando. I just want to go and shoot and do hard stuff. And that was a mistake. I mean, I think I've said this before on, I did 2 ship deployments, 2 ARG deployments as a young frogman. And honestly, I was arrogant at the time. And man, here you're on a ship, which was kind of miserable. And I had a bad attitude about it instead of, because I'm like, I should be on land training more. And instead of going, okay, this is where I'm at. Yeah, I don't have to like it, but there's all these master machinists and welders and guys that are, in charge of charts and navigation, to navigate across the globe. And here I could have, if I would have showed just a little bit of interest, those guys would have been happy to be like, oh yeah, I'll teach you how to weld. I'll teach you how to run a lathe, all these things that now I'm like, man, I want to learn all that stuff. I want to be able to do everything. And some of that's reinforced now. Kind of, we live out on a little bit of a farm, so you do need to be able to, when stuff breaks, you need to be able to fix it yourself, and so there's a lot of value in that. So I want, number one, I want my boys to know and love Jesus, and then number 2, to be capable. It's actually, so we do a program called Father-Son Ministry, where it's gone through different iterations. Currently, the way we run it is you show up, we pray, we say the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we start training. And that was very deliberate right there, that, hey, we honor God first, then we honor our nation, and then we start to train. Most of the time we do jiu-jitsu. So that's been just super cool, having the boys go from it just looking clownish, them rolling around, to, man, they're, some of those boys, I will actually, break a sweat rolling with them now, and they will absolutely catch some guys with triangles and arm bar. They're actually learning jiu-jitsu.
Damar Hamlin's number 3 jersey, top seller at Fanatics among all sports.
That's awesome.
Since Monday night. And what Fanatics is going to do from the proceeds of these sales, they're going to donate all proceeds to his Toy Drive Foundation.
I mean,
which
his
is
toy drive
it's
is
over 6 right now.
It's got to be the biggest toy drive in the world right now, I feel like, with the amount of money going into it.
Yeah.
Which is really cool to see the response to that.
Yeah, it hit $6 million. And it's going to continue to grow.
How about the story from the doctor that we had on earlier, Dr. Jay Montgomery, about the case that he worked on with a 22-year-old getting hit with a lacrosse ball at 200 miles per hour, where commotio cordis happened. I've heard different pronunciations, by the way. I've heard 2 different doctors say commotio, like commotion, and then Dr. Montgomery, they said commotio cordis.
I mean,
I think if you're saying something that's that smart sounding, you can say it however you want, and it comes across the right way. There's no correct pronunciation. However you say it, if you know that term,
commotio.
Medically, it's right, however you want to pronounce it.
How do you want to say it? Because I'll say that's the correct way.
Commotio.
Okay. Let's go with commotio then.
Like commotion.
So Dr. J. Montgomery
when
was
incorrect. When I say commodio, I think Komodo dragon. So commotio, I think commotion.
Yeah.
Which that's what they're talking about with it. So commodio. The Latin, Hutton. I'm talking. Look, my 1 year as a freshman in high school in Intro to Physical Therapy.
Don't date yourself.
Thank you, Miss McLeish, my teacher at Mount Juliet High School. Really taught me a lot of Latin medical terms. So when I say commotio cordis, you better believe that I know what the heck I'm talking about. Our show's pronunciation, commotio cordis. It's done.
Chad's perfect in the spelling bee, too. You can give you the Latin meaning.
Yes.
You know.
I took Latin in high school, and looking back, I'm such an idiot. Like, why? It's a dead language. Like, I want to know the derivative of all of our English words. What was I thinking? I thought I wanted to be a doctor.
I took Spanish.
That's practical. You're a practical person.
Hola.
Clearly someone who grew up on a farm.
I passed.
Hutton, very practical. I passed too, but
we're back at it tomorrow.
I got no
Hope you'll join us
from
3 o'clock Eastern on OutKick 360 across the OutKick network.